I never imagined that day would come. I always thought I was going to keep accumulating silences, swallowing the urge to respond, pretending it didn't hurt. But that day, in the middle of a family dinner that was supposed to celebrate my achievement, the truth came out without asking for permission. It was my promotion, my achievement, my effort after years of leaving my skin behind. And yet, I sat at the table with a tight heart. Part of me still had the absurd hope of hearing something like a "we're proud of you." How naive I was. Lucia arrived late, as always. My mother hurried to serve her plate with a smile that seemed more relieved than happy. My father watched me in silence, with that look of his that said nothing, but said everything. He was always like that. Since I was a child, he didn't need to speak to make me feel that I wasn't enough. The table was full, the food hot, everyone talking among themselves, but I felt like I wasn't there, or at least not like someone who mattered. Then, between bite and bite, without anyone asking him, without context, without emotion, he dropped it. As if he were commenting that the wine was a bit strong, he said, "You didn't deserve this success. Your sister did." Just like that, without his voice trembling, without looking away, as if it were an obvious truth, as if what he had just said didn't carry the weight of a sentence. In that instant, everything stopped. The words hung in the air like a cloud of thick smoke. No one knew what to do. No one said anything. My mother lowered her head, pretended she hadn't heard. My cousin looked at his phone, even though the screen was black. A couple of uncles exchanged uncomfortable glances. And Lucia smiled, but with that crooked smile she has when she thinks she's won something. I didn't react immediately. I stayed seated, feeling how a part of me broke and another, different one began to form. It wasn't rage I felt. It was clarity. For the first time, I saw everything clearly. I looked at him, and without raising my voice, without needing to shout or justify anything, I responded, "Then she can pay your bills too." The sentence came out on its own, clean, without resentment, as if it had been waiting my whole life to be said. And when I said it, I felt light, as if I finally took a weight off my shoulders. No one laughed. No one contradicted me. No one even breathed. It was evident that something had broken, something that had no fix. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any response. Evasive looks, closed mouths, discomfort floating in the air like a bomb about to explode. But it didn't explode, because I was no longer at war. I was at peace. For the first time, I said what I thought without fear of being the bad one, without fear of disappointing. That sentence wasn't revenge. It was a farewell, a line drawn firmly. And in that moment I knew that something had ended, and that it was okay. After that sentence, after that night, I never sat at a table with them again. Not because it hurt me, but because I understood that it no longer made sense to keep pretending. What impacted me the most wasn't what my father said. It was everything I knew he was never going to say. Because that sentence wasn't born that day. That sentence had been forming long before, from years ago, growing in silence. In every small injustice I had been accumulating unintentionally. And when I heard it, I simply confirmed what my memory had tried to bury. Because it didn't start there. It wasn't just that day. It was in my childhood, when we had that trip planned, him and me. We were going to go fishing, just the two of us. He promised me for weeks. I counted the days. I packed my backpack days in advance. And the night before, he told me we couldn't go. Lucia had a fever. Nothing serious. Nothing that couldn't be handled with rest and care. But that was enough for everything to be canceled. The trip, my excitement, the space for me. It was never rescheduled. He never mentioned it again, as if it didn't matter. And then there was that science fair. I spent weeks preparing my project. I put it together on my own, without help. I filled the kitchen with papers, tubes, poster boards. I made it to the finalists. I told my mother. I told her it would be important for them to go, that I needed to see them there. She said they would try. That day, no one came. No one. Days later, Lucia had a school art exhibition. She had painted a sunflower. They were all there, camera in hand, huge smiles. No one even asked me how it went. And when I grew up, I thought at least in adulthood the treatment would be more balanced. How naive. I paid for my degree by working since I was 17. Hours of studying between shifts, scholarships, loans. No one offered me help. No one. Instead, when Lucia finished high school, she decided to take a gap year to find herself. She didn't work. She didn't study. She traveled. And who paid for all that? They did. Proudly. As if it were an investment in a sensitive soul. I was the responsible one. She, the special one. I let it go. Over and over. I told myself it was nothing. That I was exaggerating. That every family has its issues. Until one day, by accident, I found a bill. Tuition from a private university, under Lucia's name, paid by them. And that's when the last blindfold fell off. It wasn't just perception. It wasn't my interpretation. It was real. It was systematic. It was clear. I had had to prove my worth at every step, while she was celebrated just for existing. But you know what the worst part is? That it wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. If I could have, I would have paid for her university too. That wasn't the issue. It was what the money represented. The difference wasn't in the bills, but in what they decided to do with them, in who they decided to believe in. Because I didn't want privileges. I wanted faith. I wanted to feel that my effort deserved attention, that my achievements mattered, even if they were small. But I never felt that. Never. That is the real pain. Not the favoritism, but the denial. The constant denial of who I am, of what I did, of what I achieved on my own. And the cruelest thing of all is that for years, I thought the problem was me. After finding that bill, I stopped asking myself questions. I stayed silent for a few days, not out of fear, but because I was chewing on a new certainty. I no longer needed them to choose me. I was no longer waiting for them to see me, to approve of me, to love me like they love her. Something inside me had broken. Yes, but it wasn't a break that left me weaker. It was the crack of a shell, and inside, something different was starting to breathe. That's why I agreed to go to the party. Not out of nostalgia, nor tenderness. I want to close the cycle, because sometimes, even when we already know the truth, we need to look it in the face one last time. I didn't go for them. I went for me. It was my mother's birthday. They had rented a hall, decorated with warm lights, soft music, tables with familiar names I hadn't seen in years. Everyone laughed, toasted, talked about trivial things. I watched in silence. I wasn't part of the picture. I was a body present, but I no longer belonged. That feeling was strangely comfortable. For the first time, it didn't hurt. When I approached to greet her, my mother hugged me as if nothing had happened. She said she was happy to see me, that I looked very good, very much a man. I didn't know if she meant it sincerely or out of politeness. I didn't care either. I responded kindly, but without enthusiasm, because I was no longer looking for a gesture. I just want to make it clear that mine was indeed intentional. At some point during the night, someone proposed a toast. Everyone raised their glasses, and someone offered me one too. I didn't hesitate. I took the glass calmly, stood up and raised my arm. Not to toast, not to celebrate. It was a symbolic gesture, even if no one understood it at the time. It was my goodbye. I didn't say emotional words. I didn't give thanks. I just smiled, a serene, restrained smile, with no trace of anger. That smile was my shield, because I no longer needed to defend myself. I was no longer in combat. What I felt wasn't fury, it was clarity. Then, as if the universe needed a final scene to seal everything, my father raised his voice. He said, annoyed that I had changed, that I was cold, that I was ruining the night. He blamed me for breaking the harmony, for being ungrateful, for bringing tension. As if during all these years, it hadn't been him who cultivated it. No one defended me. Some looked down. Others nodded in silence. I knew that script. I had lived it 1,000 times. But this time was different. This time I didn't explain anything. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for justice. I simply placed a glass on the table, took a deep breath, and walked toward the door. I walked past them with the same calm I'd arrived with. No scenes, no drama, just truth. And I didn't look back, not even once, because that was my true act of freedom, the simplest, the most powerful. That night, I left the hall and felt something I had never felt before, lightness. Not peace, not yet, but lightness. As if I had taken off a wet coat I had been wearing since I was a child. There were no tears. There was no need to scream, nor to prove anything. I had crossed a threshold and I knew it. The hardest part wasn't leaving, it was accepting that I wasn't going to come back. In the days that followed, everything was silent, almost surgical. I made decisions I had postponed for years, without explanations, without warnings, without drama. I blocked their numbers, deleted the chats, erased their emails. Some reached out to me, of course. Not many, because the truth is that when you stop trying to fit in, you also stop being useful to others. I changed my number, my address, my city. I didn't run away. I relocated, because sometimes it's not enough to leave physically. You have to uproot yourself so the poison doesn't keep spreading. It wasn't easy. Cutting off your family, even one that hurts, leaves a deep echo. But there comes a time when you stop being a son and start being yourself. And in that transition, the first thing you have to do is stop seeking looks that will never come. Because that's what I was for years, an echo of their expectations, their silences, their approaches. I lived repeating what they wanted to hear, hoping to be enough. Until one day, I got tired of not being me. In my new apartment, the first thing I hung up was my diploma. Not out of pride, not out of vanity. I hung it because I needed to remind myself every morning that I achieved it without them, that I got here alone, that every early morning of studying, every extra shift, every hard decision had meaning. Because that piece of paper doesn't represent a degree. It represents resistance. It represents identity. And something as simple as framing it, something I had never done before, became a sacred act. I hung it in the center of the living room, not to show it to anyone, but so I could see it, so that every time I doubted, I would know that I don't need permission to have worth, that I don't need witnesses to be enough. I didn't send letters. I didn't write farewell messages. I didn't post indirect hints. I didn't try to close with words what could only be closed with actions. Because I learned that ties aren't cut by shouting. They're cut the day you stop justifying your pain. Now I look in the mirror and I don't see the frustrated son, the ignored brother, the man who stays quiet not to make others uncomfortable. I see someone different, someone who doesn't ask for permission, someone who chooses himself, even when it hurts. And if I ever feared being alone, today I know there's something much worse. Living surrounded by people who never saw you. And then the inevitable happened. Because life has that subtle way of forcing us to close chapters, even the ones we swore never to open again. I found out through a cousin. A brief message, almost cold. Your mom is unwell. She's asking to see you. I didn't know what to feel. Not anger, not sadness. Just an inner silence that had no name. I took 3 days to respond. Not because I doubted whether to go, but because I wanted to make sure that if I went, it wasn't out of need. It was by choice. I returned to that house with slow steps. Not because I couldn't walk faster, but because every meter I advanced was a negotiation with my past. They welcomed me as if no years had passed, as if I had never left, as if the silence didn't weigh between us like a sleeping animal in the middle of the room. She was in the bedroom, pale, more fragile than I remembered, but there was something in her eyes I didn't recognize. Vulnerability. Not the kind shown to manipulate, but the kind that appears when there's nothing left to hide. I approached. I sat by her side, and it was she who spoke first. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry for having allowed it, for staying silent so many times, for letting him crush you. Her voice trembled. It wasn't an act. It wasn't a speech. It was human. Late, but human. I listened. I let her speak. I didn't interrupt, because I understood that this wasn't a conversation to fix anything. It was a final act, a closure. It wasn't going to change the past. It wasn't going to heal the child I was. But maybe it could ease something in her. And that, for some reason, felt enough. I didn't cry. I didn't hug her like in the movies. I just nodded and said, "Thank you for saying it. I don't expect anything anymore. But thank you for saying it." The rest was silence. And nothing more was needed. Lucia wasn't there. She never showed up. Not that day, nor the days that followed. They say she had work, that she was too far. I understood it as always. Her distance was never physical. It was emotional. That absence made it clear again that the family dynamic hadn't changed. It was just collapsing in slow motion. When I left that house, I didn't feel relief. I felt something harder, more mature. Acceptance. Accepting that not everything gets repaired, that some wounds heal crooked, and that sometimes forgiveness isn't about starting over, but about being able to keep walking without the weight. And as I walked away, one phrase echoed in my head like a bell. It's easy to feel sorry when there's no time left to undo the damage. I didn't think it with resentment. I thought it like someone looking at the ruins of a temple that no longer exists. You admire it, you honor it, but you know it won't be rebuilt. Months have passed since that last encounter. I haven't returned to that house, nor to that neighborhood, nor to that version of me that asked for permission to exist. It was like waking up after a long dream, one in which you were always a secondary character in your own life. And even though it hurt, even though there were days when the silence felt like a sentence, with time I discovered it could also be a refuge. Because not all emptiness is loss. Some is space to build something new. I had to rebuild myself from scratch. Choose new words, new routines, new people. And with that, a new definition of home. I learned that home isn't where you were born, nor who watched you grow. Home is where you don't have to apologize for being who you are, where you don't have to earn love, nor compete for it. Home is peace, and peace, I discovered, is the highest form of success. I no longer seek recognition, or awards, or applause. What I seek every day is to wake up without that constant pressure in my chest, to know that I owe nothing to anyone, that I'm not repeating a script written by others. I'm no longer the version they expected. I'm the one I chose to be. Sometimes, in the middle of the day, when the noise quiets and the coffee cools in the cup, I catch myself looking around. And I smile, because even though the path was hard, even though many times I felt I was walking alone, today I'm surrounded by people who love me without conditions. Friends who are like siblings, companions who stayed when others left. They don't share my blood, but they share something more important, my truth. That's what this whole journey taught me. That family isn't always the one you're born into. It's the one that chooses you, the one that respects you, the one that doesn't need you to pretend. Sometimes you have to leave behind everything that hurts to find what heals. It's not about forgetting the past, but about not living there anymore. And if you ask me whether I regret it, the answer is no. Because from all of that, I was born again. Clearer, freer, more myself. I'm not the perfect son, nor the exemplary brother, but I'm not the shadow they drag along either. I'm someone new, someone who, after everything, can look at his life calmly and say, without fear of exaggerating, I build a place where I belong. It's not the life I imagined, it's better.